Hello, everybody. This is Elisabeth by Alice Dunbar-Nelson. It so happened that Elisabeth found herself alone in the world with nothing left but the shreds of a long-ended romance, an income large enough to keep her from actual want and small enough to keep her busy planning how to make it stretch over her needs. I'm too old to think about marrying and too young to go to the poorhouse, she mused. Then she walked to the mirror and stared hard at the face reflected there. Too ugly to be attractive, and not ugly enough to make a living in a sideshow. Great heavens, what a failure I am. I don't know enough to do anything with my life, and I know too much to be self-satisfied. She was bitter, and the consciousness of the bitterness of this mood was becoming her normal condition, gave her an added pang. She clasped her hands loosely on her black gown and stared hard out of the window. It was a cheerless view that met her eyes. Gray skies over a park that was gray too, with week-old snow, unswept away and grimy with the soot of the city. Gaunt, bare-brown trees with a few huddled, miserable birds crouched on the forbidding limbs, completing the view. It was in harmony with Elisabeth's mood, and she shivered in sympathy with the birds. Elisabeth's father, a dreamy, speculative man, totally unfit for his occupation of civil engineer, had died 3 years after the family had come to New York, leaving Elisabeth and a feeble mother practically alone in the loneliest city in the world. This had been nearly 8 months before, and every morning after that Elisabeth had risen hopefully. "Do you think you're better today, Mother?" she would inquire. Always the same reply came, however. "Yes, dear, but very weak." And Elisabeth would sigh and go away in tears, for she knew what that meant. Her dream and her mother's dream was to go back to their former home. "It's a little backward country town," Elisabeth would say with her rare smile, "but it's home." Daily the mother grew weaker, but Elisabeth's hopes sank lower, until one day the familiar cheerful cry of "better, dear, but very weak" wasn't heard at all. That was the end. Elisabeth was alone, with a pittance of an income and a deep, miserable longing to follow her mother out of the cheerless gray of the winter skies. "I suppose I may as well go home," she said, but the prospect was not alluring. She had no relatives there but a spinster aunt who was very deaf. Going home meant, of course, living with her, and Elisabeth shuddered at the thought of daily contact with the ear-trumpet. "I must work," she decided, "and there's no work to do there but to teach or to sew, and I can't do either." She knew, too, that, like most provincial towns, there was no place for one bordering on spinsterhood. It would not be long before she would be discussed at tea-drinkings. She fancied she could hear the minister's wife saying kindly, "Now there's Elisabeth Parish, poor girl, I don't suppose she'll ever marry," to which the doctor's wife would reply knowingly, "Oh no, Elisabeth Busby. Let me see, she was 15 when Emma was born. I know, Emma is a full 16 now, you know." And old Mrs. Shelton would shake her head and say, "Oh well, poor girl. She never did get over Rob Halsey's death. She has to have married him the day he was buried." No, she shook herself vigorously. She would stay in New York and fight it out if she could. If she could not, well, home would be the last result. So, like a million others, she went into the maelstrom to be cast up exhausted with the prize of life, or to be sucked under to death as the fates should decide. It was a lonely struggle, lonely and hard. Had it not been that there was enough of her small pittance left to keep her from want, she should have gone down in the fight and the waters must have closed over her head. She found work after a long wait. That it paid little was nothing. It was to her liking, and it was something to occupy her. Then Richard Morriston came into her life. She toiled in the downtown office up so many flights of stairs that she had never taken the time to count them. Richard Morriston came in and out of the office and talked to her employer. Sometimes, after he had known her for a while, he would come to her chair and chat with her a bit. The days that he did this went by swifter than the others, and she would work feverishly, a soft flush on her cheeks, her eyes brightening and flashing with happiness. Richard Morriston was stead enough parsonage, whose sole purpose in life seemed to be the accumulation of more money than he knew what to do with. Elisabeth thought him handsome, and perhaps he was. He was big and strong and clean-looking. His brown eyes looked at you straightly and honestly. His square jaw and determined mouth might have reminded you of a bulldog, but for a look of tender sympathy that would steal into his eyes at times. All these things Elisabeth had treasured in her heart of hearts. She knew the merest inflection in his voice, the smallest change in expression, the least gesture he would make. He had become so much a part of her life that she could not remember when he had not been in her world. At first he would come into the office occasionally, only on business. Then he began running in every day, lingering longer by her chair each time, sometimes even seating himself. Perhaps it was unbusinesslike, but Morriston, who was a personage in the estimation of her employer, who was not to be despised or thwarted by his desires, she knew his footsteps outside the office door, and flushed and paled by turns when he entered the room, and all the while she was blooming into new life as the faded rose revives in a vase of cool water. It was one evening in the late spring, when the wisteria hung in purple blooms heavy with fragrance over the paths in the park. Elisabeth bared her head to the soft breeze and strolled happily down the path across the bridge toward the lake. It was joy just to be alive in the dusk of a spring evening, to watch the glow in the western sky reflecting itself in the calm surface of the lake. She found one of the little arbors on its edge and sank down on the seat, humming softly to herself. She was happy. She could not have told why she sang, nor why she laughed when the black swan, sailing majestically to his nest in the golden glow, spread his wings and whirled disgustedly when an impudent little duck paddled across his path. Then she felt a presence near her, and turned with a quick little throbbing at her throat. "I was walking too," Morriston began apologetically, "and I was rude enough when I saw you to follow you here. May I sit down?" She made room silently for him on the little seat, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Elisabeth could not. There was so much happiness tugging at her heart that she dared not trust her voice lest it betray her. "Isn't it beautiful?" she ventured at last. "Restful, peaceful," he made answer. After all the weary turmoil of the day downtown to turn to this. He waved his hands comprehensively over the lake with its placid waters enameled by the low foliage. "It seems like another world. If we could only live in it always," she murmured. "Perhaps we wouldn't like it so well," he said, smiling down tenderly upon her. "We should probably be yearning after what is called life, bustle and heartache and worry." She sighed and was silent again. Somehow their hands met, and his clasped over hers in a tight, warm grasp. It struck Elisabeth with a sudden pang that grasp, tender and strong, was the one thing that she had missed in her life, and missing of it had embittered her whole existence. For a while they were silent, watching the glow fade out of the sky, melting insensibly into the silver moonlight. Then Elisabeth could never have told how it happened. Morriston put her arms about her and kissed her once, twice, thrice, full on his lips, holding her close to him. "Elisabeth, Elisabeth," he murmured. "Oh, I love you," she murmured. "I love you so much. I never dreamed that I should have the joy of telling you so." "Do you love me?" he queried. There was a faint inflection of surprise in his voice. She noticed it and sat upright. "Yes, I do," she said almost defiantly. "I know you could not possibly care for me as I care for you. Your life is full, and you're happy. Oh, you could not care for me. You don't know. You don't understand." He clasped her hands. "Oh, yes, I do," he said gently. "I do care for you more than you know." And he drew her closer to him and kissed her once more. Then fate intervened in the guise of some young girls gum-chewing and giggling. They rose and walked silently away, instinctively bending their steps towards the 59th Street entrance. A curious constraint had come over them. When they spoke, it was to utter merest commonplaces. At the park gate he paused. "May I see you home, Elisabeth?" he asked softly. "Oh, no, please don't indeed. I'd rather you had not. Good night, goodbye, and thank you." And with a little nervous laugh she hurried away and left him standing stupidly at the gate. "Oh, what have I done?" she wailed when she reached home, nervously wringing her hands and pacing the floor. "What must he think of me after that? I don't know what I was saying. I forgot myself." She threw herself on the bed and writhed in an agony of shame. She remembered every look, every intonation of his voice. The blood swept over her face in a hot wave as she recalled with a sudden rush of memory his look of utter surprise, almost embarrassment when she blurted out her little confession. His after-tenderness, she decided, was born of pity, not of love. She writhed again, and hot tears of mortification trickled down her cheeks. What must he think of me? How can I face him tomorrow? She dragged herself reluctantly down to the office next day. He must come in some time in the afternoon, she knew, and he would come to her desk, and she would have to face him with the awful consciousness of last night's mistake. The morning hours went by all too swiftly. It had been before that the hands of the clock had dragged like laggards for her. Today they swept round the dial with the resistless force of taskmasters urging her to a hateful duty. 2, 3, 4 o'clock. He had not come. She rose to go home with a choking sense of disappointment. She dreaded meeting him, and yet the feeling that he had purposely stayed away stung her. He was ashamed of her. He wished to give her a chance to adjust herself, but he had not meant to kiss. He was just playing with her, and she had bared her soul to him, and perhaps even now he was laughing pityingly at her. She passed a restless night and went out next morning, mentally bracing herself for an interview wherein she was to be cold, dignified, and distant. He confused, embarrassed, and pleading. There was no such interview, however. He didn't come again that day, nor the next, nor the next. A week, 10 days passed, and she had no word from him. A dumb, cold despair had settled upon her, mixed with a certain contempt. He was afraid to come near her again. Instead of being brave to tell her that she was wrong, or better still, allowing her to tell him herself, he had played the craven. She told herself 100 times that she did not love him any more, that her contempt had strangled whatever love she might have had, and each time she knew that she was trying to deceive herself and failing miserably. It was after nearly 2 weeks of this dumb misery that she overheard the clerk, McLaurin, say to the assistant bookkeeper, "Oh, it's too bad about Morriston, isn't it?" She paused with her pen poised in the air, breathless for reply. "Isn't he better?" the other asked carelessly. McLaurin turned 3 pages of his ledger, erased some figures from his pad, scratched his head, and seemed to deliberate in an unconscionably long time before he replied. Elisabeth's heart was choking her, and there was surging noises in her throat. How could he be so indifferent? How could he help but know that she would hang on his next words as a dying man clings to the last warm touch of life? An age passed, and she went through all the purgatory before McLaurin replied, "Yes, but he mends slowly. Man can't be as sick as Morriston was and get up in a week, you know." She stumbled home in a mist of happiness and love and pity. So he had not been shunned her after all. He had been ill somewhere, ill unto death, perhaps, and she had not known it. If she could only have nursed him, have been near him for just a little while, it made her tremble with the measure of her own helpless impotence to think that somewhere in the city another was ministering to him while she was outside of his life, perhaps even of his thoughts. She thought he would write or send him flowers, but she feared lest he might think her forward again. There was nothing now to do but to wait and hope and pray, and watch the laggard clock in the office as it dragged out the afternoons while she expected him every day. Morriston came in at last, pale and languid-looking. Her heart throbbed with a great yearning pity at the sight of his weakness, and she smiled into his eyes and grasped his proffered hand, meanwhile murmuring commonplaces of sympathy. That was all for that day. He had begun to reproach her with not inquiring after him, but before she could explain, he was called away, and the current of everyday affairs parted them. A few evenings later they sat again in the little arbor by the lake. The black swan sailed majestically athwart the sunset. The faint sound of the city died in the whispering leaves of the trees. "I've been wanting to ask you all along," Elisabeth was saying breathlessly, "to forgive me for that rash statement I made to you about a month ago. You must know I did not mean it. You didn't mean it, Elisabeth?" There was a keen edge of pain in his voice. It was the water and the sun, the evening softness, I suppose, that made me forget myself. There's nothing else I could say that would excuse such boldness. I know what you must think of me. You think that I'm like all the rest of the women, trying to ensnare you because you are... Well, don't think that of me. I did mean one word." "And you did not mean it?" he reiterated dully. No, she was biting her lips to keep back the real words from her heart. "I want to be your friend, Mr. Morriston. I may I not? You were flirting with me, Elisabeth." "I flirt?" She laughed bitterly. "Do I look like a woman who would flirt?" "But you said you did not mean it. Let us be friends." She waved the question and put out her hand. "Friends? Perhaps." They were walking down the path that neared the gate. When they reached it, he put out his hand. "Friends? That's not what I expected from you, Elisabeth. Good night." He was gone before she could call him back, or could say the words that were clamoring for utterance. She sighed a little, went home, and, womanlike, having stoically lied her chances for happiness away, cried herself to sleep. The next day she heard that Morriston had gone abroad for his health. 3 dreary months passed. Elisabeth ate and drank and slept. She went to the office every day and went through a mechanical routine of work there. She walked in the park and met friends and made visits, and when the heat grew too sultry, she went out of town where she could hear the sea boom all day and watch the ships sail across the horizon, and wonder if he might be on one. Then one day she got a letter from him. "I've tried to put you from me, Elisabeth," he wrote, "but it's of no use. Your face comes between me and everything on earth and in heaven. You know you are beautiful, do you not? I can close my eyes and see your soft brown hair and your tender eyes and that dear way you have of looking at me with your soul in them. You do love me, Elisabeth. I know you didn't mean what you said the last time we met. It hurt me to have you deny that you did, when all the while I was trembling to take you in my arms and kiss the little white lie from your lips. I was hurt and angry, and I went away from you and tried to forget you. I understand how you must feel about it, but you must not think of that, but be my own true, brave Elisabeth, and let me love you and care for you as I wish. When you get this, I shall be near you, for I am writing aboard ship, and shall post it in town." When she had finished reading, she looked up to meet his eyes upon her, and for once the decorum of the office was upset. "But it was bold and forward," she protested later. They were back in the park. The fullness of summer had come and gone. The leaves, trembling in the sunset, were singing their little death songs in their autumn gowns. "No," he denied vehemently. "It was sweet and womanly. I would not have done it," she said musingly, "but you kissed me first, and in the fullness of my joy I thought that you must love me, or you would not have kissed me. You were right. I've loved you longer than you will ever know, Elisabeth, and when I kissed you it was my way of telling you so. And who shall gainsay a man when he shuts off all argument by closing one's lips?"